The sun dipped low over the rolling plains, its amber glow turning the sky into a tapestry of fire and smoke. The wind howled through the brush, carrying with it the scent of dust and horses, a familiar smell that had once filled the air with a sense of home. But now, it only brought a bitter taste to her mouth. Maggie Hawthorne's boots crunched on the dry earth as she approached the cabin, her eyes fixed on the silhouette that stood just beyond the doorway. The sight of it, a man slumped lifelessly against the wall, sent a chill down her spine. Her heart hammered her chest, an ache so deep that she could scarcely breathe. She knew, before she even stepped inside, that her father was dead. The cabin had been her father's sanctuary, his pride, and now it lay desolate. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing the aftermath of violence. Splintered furniture, broken glass, and the unmistakable stain of blood soaking the floorboards. Maggie's stomach lurched. She stepped inside, each footfall heavier than the last. Her father's body lay sprawled near the hearth, the revolver still gripped in his lifeless hand. The fire had long since died, leaving only a cold, hollow emptiness. Maggie knelt beside him, her breath shallow, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his face. But now, all she could see was the blood that had pooled around him. It hadn't been a quick death. Whoever had killed him had made sure of that. The memories came flooding back. The days when he had been the center of her world, the man who had taught her how to shoot, how to survive the rough world of the frontier. She had never thought she would have to bury him like this, alone and at the hands of some merciless killer. The door creaked again, and Maggie spun, her hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at her hip. The figure in the doorway was unmistakable. Lucas Grady. Her heart lurched at the sight of him. He stood there, his face shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. The last time she had seen him was 5 years ago, when he had promised to return to her, to be the man he had always said he would be. But that was before the world had turned its back on them, before things had gotten ugly in a land where promises were as fragile as the paper they were written on. He was older now, rougher around the edges. His once boyish face had been carved by the same unforgiving world that had stolen her father from her. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that used to make her feel safe, now held nothing but the coldness of a stranger. She could see it in his stance, the way he held himself, like a man who had lived a lifetime of regrets. "Lucas," she said, her voice sharp and raw. The name felt foreign on her tongue. "You did this, didn't you?" He flinched, just the slightest movement, but it was enough. She saw it, saw the guilt flash across his face before he masked it with the stoic expression that had become his armor. "I didn't kill him, Maggie," he said, his voice low but steady. "I swear to you, I didn't." Maggie didn't know whether to believe him. She had trusted him once, when they were children, before the world had torn them apart, before their futures had become a tangled mess of loss and betrayal. "I found your knife," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. It was stuck in his chest. "Your knife, Lucas. How do you explain that?" He hesitated, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "I don't know how it got there, Maggie, but I didn't do this." Her eyes narrowed, the fire in her gut growing fiercer. "Then who did? And why? Why would they kill him like this?" "I don't have all the answers," Lucas said, his voice hardening, but there was an edge of desperation in it now. "But I can tell you this. Your father got mixed up in something. Something bad. He had debts, Maggie. Big ones." She stood, the sudden swell of anger choking her. She had known her father had his demons, but this was more than she could understand. "I don't want your excuses, Lucas. I want answers, and I want justice." "You want justice?" Lucas's voice was sharp now. He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "You want to know what really happened? I'll tell you, but you won't like it." He took off his hat and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Your father was involved with cattle rustlers. Big ones, led by a man named Bartholomew Hale. They've been moving cattle across the border for months now, under the radar. Your father was supposed to help them move the herd to a different ranch, but he pulled out at the last minute. Wanted to get out clean." Maggie's chest tightened, the weight of the words pressing against her ribcage. "And that's when they killed him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Not just because of that, Lucas replied, his voice grim. He owed Hale money, and when your father went back on the deal, Hale didn't take kindly to it. He sent men to deal with him. I tried to warn him, Maggie. I tried to stop it, but by the time I got here, he trailed off, the guilt in his voice unmistakable. I was too late. Maggie felt the ground beneath her shift. Her father had never told her about any debts, never mentioned his involvement in anything dangerous. She had trusted him, believed in him without question, and now she was left standing over his body, unsure of everything she had ever known. The rage inside her burned hotter than before. You should have told me, she spat. Maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe I could have saved him. Lucas's face twisted in pain. You don't understand, Maggie. There was nothing anyone could have done. This wasn't about saving your father. This was about money, power. And Hale doesn't take kindly to people who turn their backs on him. Maggie's fists clenched at her sides. So, you're telling me I'm supposed to just let him get away with this? She demanded, her voice trembling with fury. I'm supposed to just walk away? Lucas stepped closer, his eyes pleading with her. Maggie, I'm not asking you to forgive me, or your father, but killing Hale won't bring him back. It won't fix what's broken. The only way to get justice is to do it the right way, the hard way. Not with bullets, but with the law. But Maggie didn't hear him anymore. The world around her was fading, replaced by the blinding rage that consumed her every thought. She couldn't hear Lucas's voice anymore, couldn't feel the weight of his words pressing on her shoulders. All she could feel was the need for vengeance. I don't care about the law, she said, her voice hard and cold. I care about making sure Hale and his men pay for what they've done. Lucas's face hardened, his jaw clenching. Then you're no better than the men who killed your father. Maggie's hand shot to the revolver at her hip, her fingers brushing the cold steel. For a moment, she thought about pulling the trigger, ending it all right then and there. But she couldn't. Not yet. She would find Hale, and she would make him pay. Turning on her heel, Maggie stormed out of the cabin, leaving Lucas behind. The wind whipped around her, tugging at her hair and stinging her skin. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. She had a promise to keep, and it was a promise she would see through, no matter the cost. The wind was sharp, biting against Maggie's skin as she rode out into the open prairie. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. The sound of hooves echoed through the quiet landscape, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the thudding of her heart. Her father's death, the betrayal, the promise of vengeance, it all burned in her chest like a fire that refused to go out. She had no idea where Lucas had gone, but there was only one thing she knew for certain now. She would find him. She had left the cabin without another word to him, without waiting for an explanation that would have never been enough. The moment he had confessed the truth about her father's debts, something inside her had snapped. She could barely comprehend it. Her father, the man who had raised her, who had taught her how to survive in this harsh world, had made a deal with outlaws. Had he truly believed he could walk away from it all? Or had he simply not cared about the consequences? The thoughts churned in her mind, twisting and turning, until they formed a knot of rage too tight to ignore. She spurred her horse faster, kicking up the dust as she rode. The night was coming, and with it, the cold that always seemed to settle over the land like a blanket, bringing with it the danger of predators and the cruel silence that came with the absence of human voices. But Maggie had no fear of the night. What she feared was not knowing where to find the answers, not knowing where to go to find the man who had ruined everything. Hours passed. The sun finally slipped below the horizon, leaving behind the dusky twilight of the frontier. Maggie pulled her horse to a stop by a small stream, letting it drink from the cool water as she scanned the horizon. The night was still. No sign of Lucas. No sign of anyone, for that matter. It wasn't until the sound of movement broke the silence that Maggie's hand flew to the revolver at her side. She turned quickly, her eyes narrowing, ready for whatever threat might be lurking in the shadows. But what she saw instead was a figure, a man on horseback, his silhouette framed by the dimming sky. He was tall, his broad shoulders hunched beneath a worn coat that had seen better days. His hat was low, casting a shadow over his face, but his eyes, pale and cold, gleamed in the fading light. He didn't look like a friend. "You got business out here, girl?" the man asked, his voice rough, like it had been scraped over gravel. Maggie didn't answer immediately. She studied him, wary but not entirely afraid. There was something in the way he carried himself, like he had seen too much of the world and trusted very little of it. His horse was a dark bay, strong and well-kept, a sign that the man knew how to take care of his possessions. But there was a scar on his cheek, a deep line that ran from his jaw to his brow, evidence of a past that was far from clean. "I'm looking for someone," Maggie finally said, her voice steady but tinged with the edge of desperation. "Yeah? Who?" The man's gaze sharpened, but his posture remained casual, like he wasn't worried about a thing. He leaned back in his saddle, his hands resting lightly on the reins. "A man named Bartholomew Hale," Maggie replied, her voice colder now, as if the name alone left a bad taste in her mouth. "I'm going to make him pay for what he did." The man's eyes flickered briefly, but he didn't react to the name. "Bartholomew Hale?" he muttered to himself. "That's a dangerous name to be chasing, girl. You got any idea what you're getting into?" "I know exactly what I'm getting into," Maggie said, her chin lifting slightly. "Hale killed my father. He paid someone to do it, and now I'm going to make sure he pays. You got a problem with that?" The man was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing her words. "You sure it's Hale you're after?" he asked, his tone suddenly more serious. "You sure you don't want to find someone else to point your gun at?" Maggie's patience was running thin. She hadn't come all this way just to be questioned by some stranger. "You know where Hale is or not?" She shot back, her hand resting on the revolver at her side. She didn't need to draw it. The threat was clear enough. The man's lips twisted into something that could have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know where he is," he said, his voice now gruff with something akin to respect. "But you ain't going after him alone. Not if you got any sense." Maggie bristled. She wasn't a child anymore, and she didn't need anyone's help. She could do this on her own, like she had done everything else. "I don't need you." The man chuckled, a low sound that held no humor. "You think you're the first one to go after Hale? I've seen dozens of folks try. Some end up dead in the dirt. Others disappear. You ain't got the muscle for this, girl. And I reckon you ain't got the knowledge, either." Maggie's temper flared, but something in the man's words gave her pause. She had spent her life surviving, learning from her father, learning how to ride, how to shoot, how to survive on the harsh land. But she had never been up against someone like Hale. Someone ruthless, someone who controlled everything around him. Maybe she did need help, but that didn't mean she had to like it. "Who are you?" Maggie demanded, her voice suddenly more guarded. The man tilted his head, as if considering her question. "Name's Cassian Voss," he said. "I don't make a habit of helping people like you, but I've got my reasons. You're going to need me if you want to get to Hale. And if you're planning on surviving the journey, you'll want me at your back. Trust me." Cassian Voss. The name meant nothing to Maggie, but there was something in the way he spoke, something in the way his eyes held hers, that made her wonder if he wasn't lying. The hard edge to his voice, the unspoken history that seemed to hang over him like a cloud, suggested he had dealt with men like Hale before. She didn't trust him, but she wasn't in a position to turn down any help. "Fine," she said finally, "but we're clear on one thing, Voss. You stay out of my way when the time comes for me to deal with Hale." Voss gave her a curt nod, his eyes glinting with something like amusement. "I reckon you'll be the one getting in my way, girl, but we'll see about that." Without another word, he turned his horse, spurring it into motion. Maggie followed, her horse reluctantly pulling behind him. The night had fully fallen now, the moon rising high over the plains, casting a pale light over the land. The wind picked up again, whistling through the cracks of the dry earth. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic pounding of hooves the only sound between them. Maggie tried to ignore the gnawing uncertainty in her gut. She wasn't sure whether she had just made a terrible mistake or if Cassian Voss was the only thing standing between her and death. She didn't know yet, but she would. Eventually, the silhouette of a distant ridge appeared against the night sky, and Voss slowed his horse, giving Maggie a chance to catch up. "We'll be crossing into Hale's territory soon," he said, his voice low, the warning clear. "You want to keep your eyes open." Maggie nodded, her jaw set. Her journey had only just begun, and there was no turning back now. The moon hung high over the desolate landscape, its pale light casting long shadows that stretched across the barren hills. The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the emptiness in Maggie's chest. For days, they had ridden in silence, her and Cassian Voss, each lost in their own thoughts, each focused on the singular goal of finding Bartholomew Hale. But the closer they got to the outlaw's stronghold, the more the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on Maggie's shoulders. They had reached the outskirts of Hale's camp at dawn. The silhouette of the barn and the scattered outbuildings were barely visible against the gray morning sky. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and sweat, and there was a tension in the atmosphere that made every breath feel heavy. The camp was quiet now, but Maggie knew better than to believe it was peaceful. The stillness was a lie, a prelude to something far darker. Cassian stopped his horse at the edge of a ravine, his eyes scanning the camp with practiced care. "Hale's inside," he muttered, his voice low. "His men won't make this easy, but they're distracted. You'll have one shot at him, and that's it." Maggie clenched her fists around the reins. Every muscle in her body was taut, ready to spring into action. "I don't need you to tell me what to do." Cassian turned his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not telling you what to do, girl. I'm telling you to be smart. You don't get to kill him just because you hate him. You got to do it right." The words stung, but Maggie kept her gaze fixed on the camp, ignoring the rise of frustration in her chest. She didn't care about right. She didn't care about justice. She only cared about revenge. Her father's blood had soaked the ground, and it was time someone paid for it. They dismounted and made their way through the underbrush, moving in silence. The camp was guarded, but the men on watch were sloppy, too distracted by the warm glow of their campfires and the cards being dealt around the tables. Maggie's heart pounded in her chest as they crept closer, her every step careful and deliberate. She could feel the tension rising in her body, a taut wire that was ready to snap. Cassian stopped just short of the nearest building, signaling for her to stay low. "You get close enough to see Hale, don't make a sound. You want him dead, you have to be silent. I'll cover you." Maggie nodded sharply, but her mind was elsewhere. She didn't care for Cassian's caution. She was so close to the man who had stolen her father's life. She didn't need anyone's help to finish what she had started. She slid through the shadows, her boots barely making a sound on the dirt. The tension was suffocating. The closer she got, the louder the rush of blood pounding in her ears became. She caught glimpses of men drinking, laughing, their voices rising in the cold night air, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. Then she saw him, Bartholomew Hale. He was standing by the campfire, his back to her, talking with one of his men. He looked just as Maggie remembered him, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same hard, calculating eyes that had once watched her father sign his death sentence. The firelight danced across his face, casting flickering shadows over the scars that marred his skin, the marks of a man who had lived a lifetime of violence. For a moment, Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to charge forward, to unleash every ounce of hatred she felt. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not yet. She reached for the revolver at her side, the cold steel steady in her grip. Her fingers wrapped around the handle, her hand trembling ever so slightly. She had thought about this moment 1,000 times, imagined the way it would unfold. She had pictured herself walking up to Hale, putting a bullet between his eyes, and watching him fall to the ground, just as her father had. But now that she was here, standing on the precipice of vengeance, she was unsure. Then Hale turned. His sharp eyes scanned the shadows, as if he could sense her presence. Maggie's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't move. She held her breath, waiting for the moment to pass. And then, just as quickly as it had come, his gaze shifted away, back to the fire. Maggie felt her pulse return to normal, but the fear still gripped her. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to feel like this hesitation, this uncertainty. She had come here for one reason, to kill the man who had killed her father. But now that the moment was here, she realized she wasn't sure she was ready. "Do it," Cassian's voice came from behind her, low and urgent. "You wanted this. Don't back out now." Maggie swallowed hard, her throat dry. She tightened her grip on the revolver. The weight of it felt foreign, the responsibility of it too much. She wasn't just killing Hale. She was killing the man who had taken everything from her. And for the first time in her life, Maggie wondered if she was strong enough to carry that weight. But she was here. She had come this far. And her father's blood was still fresh in her memory. With a single, swift motion, Maggie raised her gun and fired. The shot rang out across the camp, sharp and deadly, cutting through the air like a blade. The men at the campfire froze, their eyes wide with shock as Hale's body jerked forward, a spray of blood splattering the dirt. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then chaos erupted. Men shouted, scrambling for their guns, but Maggie didn't wait to see who was moving or where they were coming from. She bolted for cover, diving behind an overturned barrel as gunfire ripped through the air. The sound of hooves pounding the ground and the scream of startled horses filled the night as chaos overtook the camp. Cassian was beside her, his rifle already raised. He fired twice, the reports sharp and fast, the bullets striking down two of Hale's men before they could even raise their weapons. Maggie's breath came in ragged gasps as she watched the camp descend into mayhem. She wanted to feel satisfaction. She wanted to feel triumph. But all she could feel was the adrenaline coursing through her veins, pushing her forward, making her heart race faster. Through the smoke and confusion, she caught sight of Hale's lifeless body sprawled on the ground, his eyes wide open, frozen in the final moment of his life. The satisfaction should have come, but it didn't. Not like she thought it would. There was no peace in it, no relief, just emptiness. Then the ground beneath her shifted. A shot rang out too close, and Maggie ducked instinctively, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. Cassian's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Get moving, girl. We gotta go now." She didn't hesitate. She ran. They raced through the camp, dodging gunfire and scrambling over obstacles. The night seemed to stretch on forever as they made their way to the horses. But just as they were about to break free, a shout came from behind them. One of Hale's men had circled around, cutting off their escape. Maggie's heart pounded as she turned, drawing her revolver again. There was no time to think, only to act. The man aimed his rifle at her, but before he could fire, a shot rang out, and he crumpled to the ground. Cassian was already there, his rifle lowered, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome," he muttered, his voice cold. Maggie didn't respond. She couldn't. All she could feel was the weight of what she had done, the emptiness that filled the space where vengeance had once lived. She had killed Hale, but it hadn't been enough. It wasn't enough. As they rode off into the night, Maggie realized something she hadn't before. She had taken her revenge, but it had cost her something deeper than her father's death. It had cost her part of her soul.